Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to go over some of the interesting things that I'm doing in the mixing project for my track Beyond. This is one of the tracks that I recently released on Eclipse. So if you haven't heard the track yet, make sure that you go check it out before watching this video. So as you can see, here we are in the project. There's a lot of different tracks in here and there's a lot of different things happening, but I'm going to try to go over as many of the interesting things as possible. I'll also quickly scroll through the mixer so you get an idea of how that looks like. And one of the big things that I want to show you in terms of mixing is that you don't have to address every track with a ton of different plugins. As you can see, there's many tracks that sit in here empty without any effects on there. There are some tracks that have a lot of plugins on them. There are some tracks that have 1 or 2 plugins on them. And it just ranges between a few plugins, no plugins, some plugins over here, a lot of plugins over there. There isn't like a standard amount of plugins or a standard chain of plugins that I like to use on different tracks. And all of that purely comes down to the mixing mindset that I have, and that is that whenever I'm mixing, I just hunt for problems. I think to myself, I listen, I say like, oh, I hear this thing that I don't agree with in the track, let's try to fix that part. Which means that for almost half of the time that I'm actually in the project working on a mix, I'm actually just listening to what I'm doing. I'm not even actively touching any of the parameters or any of the plugins. I'm just kind of reflecting on the decisions that I need to make. At the end of the day, what is important for mixing is not so much learning all of the different tricks and different processes that you need to use, but more listening and being able to identify when to actually use any of those processes. It also isn't much about which specific compressor that you're using or what specific frequency you're balancing in the equalizer. What is more important is that the overall balance is correct. So the way that I achieve that is I just start off with the initial balance. What that means is that when I'm starting on a mixing track, each and every one of these tracks is muted. So that will correspond to all of the different tracks that have a file on them will be muted. So that will look something like this over here, where each and every track is just muted out like this. And then one by one, I'll unmute them. I'll adjust their volume, do a little bit of EQing if necessary. If I immediately hear something like, okay, that is wrong, that is immediately something that I can fix. But otherwise I move on and I basically just do like a volume balance for that particular part of the track. So for each file, I'll just unmute it, listen to it, quickly make some adjustments, and then move on to the next track. Now, I'm not doing this in the way that I'm showing here, where I'm just going down the list of different items that are in there. There isn't the particular ordering of just me scrolling down like this and unmuting things. I'll usually go purely on the basis of what is most important to least important in the track. So that means I start with the kick, then I unmute the bass line, I'll balance those two elements out together, then I'll move on to the drums, I'll balance all of the drums to the kick and bass that I've already unmuted, and then I'll go into some earlier sequences, some more of the important sequences stuff. Maybe some of the most important one-shots in the track. I'll usually unmute the first few important vocals. In this case, that would be the main vocal over here. I mix that in relatively quickly. And then I moved on to the more background kind of one-shots and stuff, the supporting sequences that sit in here, some of the effects, some of the pads and atmospheres that I have in here. Just the more important it is, the earlier it gets put into the initial mix. Now I say I do volume balance, and the reason for that is I don't export with any of the volumes set up in the production project. What I do is I actually normalize each and every one of these files in here. And then if I just go into item properties, you'll see that we have -8 dB on the gain over here, meaning that all of these hit their individual channels with a gain of -8 dB. So I have a little bit of headroom to mix everything in. What that also means is that my loudest element, my kick over here, as you can see, doesn't get a dip in volume. It will peak at -8 dB, this kick. And that's where I want it to be for it to sit well in the mix. This is kind of the standardized level that I have taught myself mixing with, and that is just having the kick at -8 dB and having the bass line a little bit below that and having the drums a little bit below that as well. You kind of get to know what the volume should be in the longer term. You don't really have to concentrate. Obviously, there's going to be like a range in the sense that, for example, the drums might go from -2 to -5 dB on the mixer over here. And you can see we're in that mix, but obviously depending on the track that you're working on, you're going to have different balances that you need. So one track might get -5 dB on the drums and the other track may need -2 dB on the drums. But working with a standard volume really allows you to work a little bit quicker because you kind of roughly know where tracks are going to be in terms of their volume balance. Same is true for equalizers. When it comes to equalizer, just stick with one EQ and use it. It doesn't really matter what type of EQ it is, as long as you know it and that you can work quickly in it. I like M Equalizer here because it's just fast and reliable and it does everything that I need it to do. And I can scroll through this project and show you that all of the EQs that I'm using are probably going to be of the same variety here. There's very rarely that I use an EQ that is not that specific EQ. I'll see if I can find an example of that happening, but it might be the case that in this project this never happens. And in fact, the only example that I could find is the Lufticus that I use on my drums here. Now, I've talked about the Lufticus before. This is kind of one of those magical little tricks that I can show you, and that is that you can use a Lufticus plugin like this or any other emulator of this particular EQ. I believe this is called a Maag EQ, but I'm not entirely sure. I would need to Google that and find out exactly which this is emulated after. But this is a free plugin, so I definitely recommend that you pick it up. And what you can do with this particular plugin is you can boost 40K, which kind of will roll down in the lower, more audible frequencies, and then you can just turn it up right here, getting some very nice extra air frequencies for particular sounds that need them. So here in the mix, you can hear the difference that this EQ makes. Note that this is volume compensated, so you can really hear it's not really making the sound louder, it's just pushing it up more to the higher frequencies. And this is just one of those little tricks that I have in my tool belt that I need this specific EQ for. But other than that, I would recommend sticking to one plugin and just learning that more and more and more. And for that reason, this is the only other EQ plugin that I have on this particular project. Even though if I go into my EQs over here, you can see that I have a massive amount of different equalizers that I could choose from. The same is going to be true with dynamics as well in terms of compression. When it comes to that, my favorite dynamics processor is going to be the M Dynamics range. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of the Melda plugins. I've been using them for a long time, but it's just very, very intuitive with the graph readout over here and the precise gain reduction meter that you have over here, allowing you to very easily gain stage the output of the plugin, which by the way can also be done automatically. I just like to do it manually by ear because I think it's a little bit better to be able to have fine control over that, and it might not be the case that the exact same loudness that it had before the plugin is the right loudness that the plugin should output at as well. But just like with the EQs, this is kind of like my standard dynamics. You can see it's being used all over this project over here. You can see another one over here. If I scroll down, I'll probably see more of them. Maybe towards the vocals as well. Here in the pads, as you can see, we have some. But in this case, for the vocals, you can see that I'm not using the M Dynamics. You can see that I'm using the Waves SSL compressor, as well as the TR5 Black 76. Now, these are both very specific compressors in that they have a very specific task. These are very nice. These 76 emulations are very nice on vocals and really kind of getting all out of the vocal. Whereas the SSL is very nice for kind of gluing effects on your elements. It's really hard to explain exactly what gluing is, but you can think of it as taking a few different elements or a few different parts within one element and just kind of unifying them in terms of their dynamic range. Now, obviously, that is kind of what a compressor in general is, but there's a few different problems that we're trying to fix when it comes to dynamics, gluing being one of them, and the SSL is just really good at doing that gluing task. Where, as I said, I like to use M Dynamics over here for more precision kind of compression. So we've had volume, we've had EQ, we have had dynamics. There's one more thing that I like to look at when it comes to my mixes that I really take a long time figuring out for the different elements, and that is going to be the stereo field and specifically the stereo width. When it comes to mixing sidetrans, what you'll not often hear is a lot of use of panning. There may be some creative uses of panning, but in terms of the mixing aspect of it, there isn't really a space that we're trying to emulate, as opposed to when you're, for example, mixing a rock band, where you want to emulate the bassist being on the left side of the stage, whereas the guitarist is on the right side of the stage, the drums are in the middle of the stage. So you're using panning to position different elements according to where they would be played on the stage, for example. In electronic music, in sidetrans, something like that doesn't really happen, and I hear a lot of beginner producers thinking that they need to pan a lot when I refer to stereo play. And that isn't really true. What I really mean is just the overall stereo width of the element. And a plugin like M Stereo Spread is really useful for doing something like that. It has built-in spectral generator, which is introducing extra stereo width in even mono signals. We have an overall width control here. This doesn't make a mono signal stereo, but it can take a stereo signal and make it more stereo or less stereo. And then obviously there's some other parameters in here to kind of tweak the tonality of the stereo wave that you're getting from it. But this is going to be another very important element of your mix, because without doing something like this, your track is going to sound very, very small when it's being listened to on a stereo system. And even though we're making music that is probably going to be played in clubs or in festivals, which often use a mono system, the DJ that will play that track will first hear it on a stereo system at home before he puts it in his set. So definitely make sure that your stereo field is also on point when mixing your track. Now, initially when preparing and recording this video, what I wanted to do is just show you kind of like cool mixing tricks. But I decided to go this other route of just trying to explain the basic mixing mindset that I have when I go into a project like this. The reason for this is when it comes to mixing tricks, you'll be surprised how little you actually use them in a day-to-day mixing session. It is sometimes true that a particular trick is needed to achieve a certain result that you want for your mix. But 95 to 99% of the time, what is best is spending that time not on identifying the little tricks that you can use to slightly improve that one element, but to just look at the grand picture and look at the overall balance of your mix and focus on working on that. Now, what that could mean for you personally is doing something like top-down mixing, where you're first starting off with mixing all of the grooves together, and then you go more and more in detail into the individual elements. I personally don't like to work that way because, as I said, I have all of the tracks muted and I add them one-to-one, so there's a different approach there. And the reason for that is because I obviously lose the volume balance that I had in the production phase. So I have to start every mixing project by just adding one track after another to the mix. Because if I didn't and I started playing all the tracks at once, it would be way too loud. Now again, just with like the little tricks that you can learn, it doesn't really matter if you have a certain mixing style. Everybody should be able to get to a decent enough like final result, independent of the different types of mixing that you're trying to apply to your project. Because at the end of the day, what really matters, as I said before, is just the listening and trying to make the balance in your track. And the truth of the matter is the best way that you can learn that kind of mixing is just to do it. Especially in a project like this, where you export all of your tracks to audio, have them as stems in the production that you can just look at but cannot edit. Because one of the things that this allows me to do is it allows me to stand back from the production, look at it as just a bunch of files and not as a bunch of instruments that I can change. So I'm much less likely to go into nitty-gritty details because there's just a lot of things that I cannot change anymore. Like as you can imagine here, I have an audio file, so I cannot go into the sound design of these sounds over here. If there's anything that is wrong with the sound design, I can try to mask it a little bit with maybe a bit of clever EQing or something like that. But that's probably the maximum that I can do. And this is also one of the steps that allows me to just produce faster and finish music faster, because at this point, I have committed everything in terms of production. I have now moved on into the next stage, and all that I can really do is take the elements that I already have and balance them out a little bit. Trust me, you definitely don't want to get back into the production, change around the different elements, maybe add a few elements or subtract a bunch of elements, and then have to carry that over into a mixing project like this. There's just a lot of work involved, and usually it's not worth the hassle, so it's kind of like a natural deterrent from you getting stuck in the project and continuously falling back into the production phase. So that's everything that I wanted to talk about for today. I just wanted to get you an insight into the mindset that I have when I'm mixing. If you want to learn more, you can always check out my masterclass in which I explain everything that I do in terms of a mix. You'll see the mixing process live from the beginning till the end until the final mix is created. And it also includes all of the production and the mastering, totaling to almost 24 hours of edited footage. You can check that out on my Gumroad page. Links for that are going to be in the description. But that's going to be the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye. In a very deep and bitter sense.